Ethiopia has a high central plateau that is known as the Abyssinian Highlands or the Ethiopian Highlands. This plateau sits at an altitude that ranges between 1,290 meters and 3,000 meters above sea levels. You find about 25 mountains to this plateau, in which the highest mountain stands at about 4,500 meters above sea level. This mountain is known as the Ras Dashen, right? The Ras Dashen, right? Now, a lot of rainfall falls upon this plateau, right? And has a number of lakes which are connected to it. 12 lakes to be specific. This plateau also is connected to about 9 major rivers with their tributaries. Now, it is believed that the amount of water resources which are found in uh, Ethiopia can be placed at a conservative amount, which stands at about 123 billion cubic meters of water, right? So, with this amount of water, it is believed that the hydroelectric potential that can be produced here, right? The power that can be produced from this hydroelectric potential, right, stands at about 45,000 megawatts, right, which is about 45 gigawatts, right? That brings them to a total that is similar to I'd say, the amount of electricity that South Africa produces, right? Yes, South Africa produces about 40, I'd say about 40,000 megawatts of electricity, right? So it's gonna make quite a huge difference, right? This hydroelectric power potential basically will turn Ethiopia into a, a powerhouse of electricity, right? Green electricity, which it can distribute to its neighbors that surround it. The amount of water that is found in Ethiopia also can create opportunities of irrigation schemes, right? And expansion of agricultural activities within the country. Now, the rain water which flows from the Ethiopian highlands, right, basically flows down to split into a number of basins. There are three specific basins that I'll be focusing on here. The first one is known as the Nile Basin, right? The second one is known as the Drift Valley Basin, and the third one is known as the Juba Basin. The Nile Basin covers about a third of the Ethiopian landmass. This basin sits towards the northern parts of the country, right? This is where the famous River Nile originates from. It originates from this basin that is known as the Nile Basin. Now, when it rains, right, water collects at the mountains of Ethiopia and the highlands of Ethiopia, right? Now, in this basin, when the water flows from the mountain, right, towards an easterly direction, right, it flows towards Lake Tana, right? And then from Lake Tana, it flows towards Sudan, towards Khartoum, right? Now, this flow of water is basically known as the Blue Nile. Now, about 85% of the water that you find in the Nile, right, comes from particularly this river that is known as the Blue Nile, which originates from Lake Tana, right, after water has been collected in the rainfall in the Ethiopian mountains. Now, the second direction at which the water flows, right, but this time towards the west, right? Now, when it rains, right, water collects at the Ethiopian mountains, right? Then they flow towards the west, right, towards a river that is known as Tekedze River. Now, this river basically flows towards South Sudan, right, to contribute to the water of a river that is known as the White Nile, right? So the White Nile is formed from the water that flows down from the Ethiopian mountains, right, through the Teketsi River, right, uh, down to South Sudan, right, further down to Sudan, where it will meet with the Blue Nile in a place called Khartoum, which is the capital city of Sudan. The Nile is one of the longest rivers that you can find in the continent of Africa. It is believed to have two sources where the water actually comes from. The first source is believed to be from Lake Victoria, which is found in Uganda. Then the water flows down South Sudan, right? And further down towards Sudan, right until the capital city, Khartoum. This part of the river is actually known as the White Nile. It is believed to contribute about 15% of the total water which is found in the river Nile. And the second source where the water is believed to come from is known as Lake Tana. Lake Tana is basically found in Ethiopia, right? Then the water flows from Ethiopia down Sudan towards Khartoum, right? This part of Nile is known as the Blue Nile. Now, in Khartoum, the Blue Nile and the White Nile come together to form the Nile as we have come to understand it and know it. It is believed that uh, the Blue Nile, which originates from Lake Tana, right, contributes about 85% of water to what we know as the Nile River. The Nile is suitable for irrigation purposes, but not necessarily transportation. So the Nile is not commercially navigable. The Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam started construction in April of 2011. By the time of April 2023, the dam has been 90% completed. In the process of construction the dam, there needed to be about 4 filling phases, right? The first filling phase occurred in July of 2020, where about 4.9 billion cubic meters of water were filled into the dam. The phase two of filling the dam came in July of 2021, where a whopping 13.9 billion cubic meters of water were filled onto the dam. This was enough water to be able to initiate or to include hydropower to be produced within the dam. About 750 megawatts are currently being produced. But the potential of electricity, of hydropower that can be produced by the dam stands at a 5,150 megawatts. So the potential of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam stands at about 5,150 megawatts, which is about 5.1 gigawatts. And the third phase of filling the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam started in August of 2022. And the fourth phase of filling the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam was completed in September of 2023. The Drift Valley Basin covers about a quarter of Ethiopia's land mass. This water basin passes through the center of Ethiopia. Now, when it rains in Ethiopia, water collects at the highlands and the mountains of Ethiopia. And then the water flows in a number of directions. The first direction at which the water flows is towards Djibouti, right? Down a river that is known as the Awash River. Then you have a second river, right, which starts flowing from the mountains of Ethiopia, right, towards the southwest of the country, right, towards Kenya, right, in a river that is known as the Omo River. And when you move downstream, Omo River, right, towards Kenya, right, at about a distance of about 675, you find a lake that is known as Lake Turkana that is found in Kenya. The Jibe Cascade is a series of dams and power stations that have been built along the Omo River. Now, the first dam is known as Jibe 1, right? Which basically is a dam that can produce hydropower. At the level of hydropower that can be produced here is about 184 megawatts. Now, further down the river, you find a second dam known as the Jibe 2, which is basically a dam that produces hydroelectric power, right, at a rate of about 420 megawatts. In 2016, a dam known as the Gilgal Jibe third dam, right, was completed and commissioned. This dam was able to produce about 1,870 megawatts. It's quite a big dam, right? The dam wall stands at a height of about 250 meters. Now, they are also planning to build about two Jibe dams, right? Jibe 4, right? And Jibe 5, right? Now, Jibe 4 is expected to be able to produce about 1,472 megawatts. And the Jibe 5 dam system is expected to produce about 560 megawatts. So you have a number of dams which are built along down the length of Omo River. Now, of course, with more construction of dams and hydroelectric power plants along the river of known as the Omo River, right? This will tend to bring problems or a slowed down flow of rate of water towards Lake Turkana in Kenya, right? So there might occur along these basins, particularly in the Omo River, the same problem that Egypt has with the construction of the dam that is known as the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam along the Nile Basin, right? So here we also have the potential to face the similar problem, right? The more you build dams, right, the more you control the flow of water, right? The more less water flows downstream towards Lake Turkana, which is found in Kenya, right? Sooner rather than later, Kenya will start complaining in the similar fashion that Egypt is complaining, right, about the filling of the dam, right? So E- Ethiopia must be very careful and work with its neighbors in constructing this amount of hydroelectric power plants, right, and dams in the contributing rivers of towards the lake of that is found in Kenya, right? So it is very important for Ethiopia and the people of Kenya to keep a very close eye in the construction of these series of dams along the Omo River. The Juba Basin covers about a third of the Ethiopian landmass. This basin sits towards a southeasterly direction of the country. There are two main rivers which flow from this basin. Both of these rivers start at the highlands of the Ethiopian mountains. The first one flows down from the highlands of the Ethiopian mountains, right? Down a number of tributary rivers, right? That lead towards Somalia. And then this water flows down a river that is known as the Juba River. This river eventually flows to drain towards the Indian Ocean, right? Now, there's a second main river which flows from this Juba Basin, right? It is basically known as the Shabelle River. The Shabelle River basically also starts from the Ethiopian highlands, right? And then it flows down the Shabelle River, right? But towards an easterly direction. And then when it reaches Somalia, it flows towards a southerly direction where it eventually meets with the river known as Juba, right? Which both of them eventually drain towards the Indian Ocean,